Great to have you back, Paul. Welcome to the Fin Me Up podcast again. It's great to see you. I was in Namibia this morning. It was -10 when we got on the airplane at 6 o'clock. I'm happy to see you also getting nice and warm and nicely dressed. I wanna start where we ended when we stopped last week or 2 weeks ago. We spoke about your journey and how you got saddled with debt and how you eventually managed to work your way out of the debt. But a big part of like working yourself out of debt is it's got two components for me. So one is budgeting and really tracking where your expenses are going, managing that nicely and putting money away to pay off the debt that you had. But obviously the other side of the coin is earning some money and making an income. How do you can only save so much, but at some point, the ability to make a little bit more money is also helpful. I know you've done quite a bit of work around income streams and what they mean and where they fit in. So maybe for the first couple of minutes, tell us how you got yourself out of that debt trap and saving more, but also earning more, and then just talk to us about the income streams that you've researched.
Yeah. So thanks for that, Jaco. It's always a pleasure to jump back on a call with you because I really love the topics that we discuss. So when we come back to the story of what we all want, which is freedom, right? Economic freedom. One of the key components there is, and I like to use a reference from one of the greater books that I read when I was in my teens. My mom bought me this comic, Eat the Rich Dad Poor Dad, and in there, Robert Kiyosaki says true wealth is not measured. It's not a number that you have like 20, 30, 40 million. It's true wealth is being able to live off the capital that you have at that stage without having to work for someone else. So that means regardless of what level it is, if I can live off it, that's true freedom, because then I have true wealth. Because that means that if I have $1 million and I only need 3,000 as an example per month. So that means that on that 3,000 rand that I have, if I earn 5% interest on that million, that's 50, right? That's 50,000 rand. Means that I'm 36,000, 50 minus 36,000. So my money will never deplete. That means that I will then have a sort of a never-ending stream of income. And that's true freedom, not having to work for someone. But in order to get to that level of whatever your number is, right, you need to have some sort of income. And I did research. I tried to, in those stages where I was graveling and trying to figure out how to get out of this mess, I did the research and I found out there was 7 streams of income, only 7 streams of income that exist. I challenge anyone to come point out another one for me, but these are typically the 7. First one was the earned income, which is typically your salary. You exchange your time for money. So you go to your job, you work 8 hours and you're paid a salary at the end of the month. The second one was profit income, meaning I buy something for a certain amount and then I sell it for a higher amount and the difference is my profit. Third one was basically rental income. I buy a property and I rent it out. The fourth one was a royalty income. The fifth one, interest income. The sixth one was basically the dividends income. And then the last one was capital gains income, where you acquire something, it gains in value, and then you sell it for a higher value. Right. So those are the 7 types of income that I identified in this journey of trying to discover which income streams do I have access to try and raise this capital asset that I can buy my freedom with. And in that, what I also discovered is, very interestingly, there were certain things that impacted these incomes and that basically impacted the quality of life you also had, right, throughout while you were generating these several streams of income. And the first one was basically, it's 5, and I categorized it along 5. So the first one is inflation, basically. The second one is how secure the income is. The third one is how passive is it? Do I need to be actively there to make it? The fourth one is basically whether or not I need capital or a lot of money to start that income. And the last one was based on tax. So I ranked it according to this criteria to determine which is the best sort of income to have. And today I just want to take time, if you would allow me, to unpack the first 2, and then we can sort of unpack the rest at a later stage.
Just give me those 7 again: salary income, rental
so
income.
Earned income. So it's earned income, profit income, rental income, royalties income, dividends income, capital gains income, and interest income.
Okay. Got them. Yeah, please, let's start unpacking them. Which 2 do you want to start with?
Let's unpack the first 2. I think let's unpack what most of us do. 99% of us are in sort of this income bracket, which is the earned income, which is salary. Interestingly enough, do you know where the word salary comes from?
No, I don't.
It comes from the word sal, which comes from the word salarium, which comes from the word salt. So back in the day, Roman soldiers were paid in salt because at that time salt was so valuable. They would get paid as not because back then they didn't have money like we do now, so they would pay people in salt or the soldiers in salt. And that's where the term also comes from. When a soldier was lazy, there was this saying that he's not worth his salt. That's where that saying comes from. But be that as it may, our salary, if you just take a step back and really analyze it and analyze it according to the 5 criteria that I gave, and we can unpack the first one being then the inflation. So if you look at inflation, most of us, our salaries either just aligned with inflation, or if we did good that year, slightly above inflation, but it's never significantly above inflation. And just to sort of unpack inflation, what inflation is basically, it's the measurement of an increase of price of goods from one period to the next. So that means a bread loaf cost me 10 Rand this year. If inflation is 4%, that bread loaf will cost me 10 Rand 40 cents next year. But if my salary only increased by 3%, my salary increased, that 10 Rand that I was able to get next year, this year, will only be 10 Rand 3 cents next year. That means that bread that I used to be able to afford, I can afford less and less of it. So that's why inflation is tricky, because if your salary is not aligned with inflation or above inflation, you tend to struggle. So when it comes to a typical salary, it does not really score well when it comes to inflation. So I typically rate this in the 5 categories that I have. I either give it a 0 when it's neutral, a 1 when it's a positive, and a negative. When it's a negative, I give it a -1. So from that perspective, a salary I would typically rate from an inflation perspective a nil. So it's neutral. Sometimes you get promotions and sometimes it's higher. So that's how I would rate. From a passive perspective, I would rate it sort of also a nil, because because you need to be actively there. Salary is anything but passive. You need to come and sit there and get paid for the hours that you work, right? From a secure perspective, is, however, one of these secure forms of income, because once you sign that contract and once you are permanent, the employer must really go through a lot to get you fired, even if you are not performing. And then the last one is also from a capital requirement perspective. I would also rate a salary a 2, because it doesn't require any capital to start making this income. You sign a contract, and then from at the end of that month, you already start making your income. And then finally, from a tax perspective, I would rate it a 0 as well, because what that means is from a tax perspective, when you look at the definition of income of items that are taxed, your salaried income is usually in the Income Tax Act, amongst the top 3 items that are defined as items that are taxable. So it's generally aggressively taxed. So therefore, I would also rate it a 0. So in my rating criteria, if it's doing good, it's a 2. If it's doing sort of medium, it's a 1. And if it's having no contribution, it's a 0. So from that rating criteria, when you add up all of them, ideally you're supposed to have at max a rate of 10, and at minimum a rate of 0. So out of that, salary sits in a rate of about 4 or 40%. So it's not for me, the highest sort of form of income that you would typically look at to start generating. Yes, it is a start, but it should just be that. It should start to sort of start making you income. And then once you have saved up enough, you should start exploring other forms of income, such as going into investing, so that you can start earning interest or dividends income, or even putting something into property so that you can get rental income and also capital gains income.
Just quickly take me back to that rating categories. So we've got
Yeah.
seven sets of income, and we've got a rating scale that you're going to apply to these 7 incomes. So we want to see which of these incomes ultimately gives us more freedom, which are a little bit more hard work, for which wanneer moet ons 'n bietjie sakke sout opvreet om
yeah.
So quickly talk to me about just reframe for me the grading scale. So it's tax.
Okay.
It's capital requirement. What are the 5 categories?
Let's go into that. So the first one is inflation. Does whatever income you're making beat inflation? Because if you are not beating inflation, you're losing money, or your money is growing negative. So it's not keeping up with the value of the market. Number 2, is it passive? Does it require me to sit behind a desk and work at it the whole day, right? And number 3 thereafter is is it secure? Is it, if something happens today, am I likely to lose it? How secure is that, right? That income that I have. The fourth one is the capital requirements. How much do I need to put in to start making that income? What level of contribution do I need to give to start making that income? And the final criteria is basically taxes. How taxable is it? Is it on the high end of the taxable table or the low end of the taxable table?
Okay, so those are 5 ways to evaluate your sources of income, and then we're going to rate them and see which are better sources. Salaried income for most of us is the starting point. I think we can all agree with that. Pretty much all of us had a job somewhere, and then we had a first job, whether it was being a waiter at Spur or whether it was doing articles somewhere. Most of us start off with some kind of a salary income, and it scores a 4 because it's easy to get into, or at least if you can apply and get a job. You don't need a lot of capital. And then number 2, what was the other one that it scored high on?
The other one was the security. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because it's quite secure. Most jobs are secure, although that, I suppose, is debatable for many people, but at least in terms of the history, like salaries are quite secure. And our parents' generation worked at the same job for many, many years, and they earned a good retirement out of that. Okay, so that's number 1. What's income stream number 2?
So profit income is basically like profit income is where you buy something for R1 and sell it for R2 and then keep a difference of that R1. So that's a profit you make, and the reason why it's attractive for most, it beats inflation. So when it comes to the 5 categories that we have, when you look at sort of ranking the types of income from an inflation perspective, it beats inflation most of the time. However, the failure rate of these entities or these businesses that are started is quite high. So we will therefore not give it a 2 rating, but put it at a 1, where it's sort of in the middle from an inflation perspective. You beat inflation when you do good, but then most of the time, most of the businesses fail. Number 2 is then the passive one. The type of income, technically, most of the people tend to work more than even the end salaries or end income category, because they need to work, put in the sweat to get the income. So most of the business owners that I know put in more hours than actually salaried employees. So therefore, it ends at 0 from a passive perspective. From a secure perspective, it's also one of the sort of unsecure sort of environments, because you take your money and you are risking it to say, I believe that product that I will buy, I will be able to sell for $2. In the instance you don't sell it for $2, you are at risk of losing that $2. So from a secure perspective, it's not one of these most secure ways to make that money, sort of an income. And a capital requirement perspective, it's also one of the worst sort of capital requirement categories, because you definitely need some form of capital to start it. You cannot start with you definitely need to have saved up something to invest in whatever product you want to buy to start selling that. And then finally, from a tax perspective, business companies are also, depending on how you structured it, they are also tax quite high. So companies are also one of those where the tax is not really too lenient to you. So from a ranking perspective, if we look at the 5 categories from a profit income, we said number 1, inflation perspective, we gave it a 1. From a secure perspective, we gave it a 0. From a passive perspective, we gave it a 0. From a capital requirement perspective, we gave it a 0. And a tax perspective, we also gave it a 0. Therefore, it's only ranked. It's the ranking at 1 or 1 or 10 or 10% basically. So one of sort of the worst ways to try and earn income. And it also speaks to the failure rate that we have in the market, as proven by the University of Western Cape, where 70 to 80% of the businesses fail in the first 5 years.
So, Paul, profit income, that's the kind of the hustle culture, buying and selling,
Correct.
wheeling and dealing, the hawkers on the street, anyone like, having a product somewhere that they want to try and sell. And if we're saying that, the risk of that is quite high, the security is quite low, and you work really hard. There's a saying that I've heard that says, you quit your 40 hours a week job to work 80 hours a week for yourself. Much more present. You've got to work a lot harder. Yeah. Obviously, there's upside rewards, and we're not debating whether, it's good or bad to take that decision today. We're just ranking income streams in terms of the ability that they give you for freedom. So we're not saying it's bad to go out and hustle and do stuff. We think it's great, and a lot of people do it, and we do it ourselves. But you can't stay there forever. That's not an income stream that's going to benefit you in the long term. And that's why it kind of ranks as a 1 out of 10.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's basically what the ranking positions well for us is more not so much the quality of what it can do, but more the risk that's associated with it. Because yes, you can make a little bit of income, but when you look at the quality of life that it just takes away from you, there's a high risk associated to you.
If you run a little shop or you run a table where you buy and sell goods, you got to be there every day, because if you're not there,
Correct.
nothing happens.
Correct. So if you can't even you can try to take a holiday, maybe even a weekend getaway, but then that means that either you, number one, close shop, which is ideally not what you want, but number two, you get someone in, and then what's worse is like what happened with me when I used to own a restaurant. When I opened out my eyes, the guys had stolen 400,000 from me, right? And my partner at that stage. So it's when you are not present at setups like that, you tend to lose more money. It's probably better to just close shop for that time you're not there and go do something else. But that's not the nature of business, really. Yeah.
Got you. So that's number two. That's the profit income, the hustle, the bustle, the wheeler, the dealer, the hustle culture that we read about a lot. What's the third one on your list?
The third one is basically rental income. Rental income is basically where you buy a property and you rent it out, and you earn that rental income on a monthly basis, basically. So that one is also one of the for me it's one of the better sorts of streams of income, because it's twofold. It gives you rental income. If you buy a property, it gives you rental income. And then there's also capital gains in terms of appreciation of the value of the property if you buy in a good enough market. Generally, over time, property has appreciated, right? So increased in value. So that just speaks to what sort of a good income or income it is. Yes, there are challenges such as you have to maintain this and tenants and whatnot. But overall, if you take these two sort of streams of gains of income and combine them into rental income or rental property, then you tend to have a bit of a better sort of outcome over the long run, because the two compound. And it's one of the best forms of assets that most of us acquire when we start to earn a little bit of income. Most of us start to acquire properties, and it's because of that dual income perspective that it has. So when we sit down and just unpack where it sits in terms of our ranking now, if we quickly do that ranking, from an inflation perspective, right, it tends to beat inflation. I just have some stats here from a research paper that was done, and we can add the information at the bottom. So between Cape Town, Jozi, and Pretoria, the property prices have increased anything between 6-7% to all the way 14% over the years, over a 5-year period. In that period, that means that the property value has increased, and you are also likely to have received rental income, which where you, even if you just add the inflation link there, the property value compounds to add to overall have this asset or your income value increase over that time period. Therefore, from an inflation perspective, I gave it a 2 because it ranks quite well when it comes to beating inflation. From a passive perspective, I also gave it a 2. Yes, there's maintenance and things that you need to do, but you generally don't need to sit there for 12 hours to make that income from it. So therefore, I ranked it a 2. From a security perspective, also, based on the environment that we are operating in and the banks using it as a security, there in itself is already confirmation that it's quite a secure some form of investment. I also gave it a 2. And then from a capital requirement perspective, where we are saying in order for it to rank 2, we need to have zero capital requirement. We are saying here, unfortunately, we require capital to invest into properties and start buying property. Therefore, for capital requirement, I gave it a 0. On a tax perspective, the rental tax is of rent is probably is rent is taxable, so it's capital gains depending on what kind of property you have. But let's say it's taxable for this purposes because we're trying to keep it very layman's. I gave it a 0. So when it comes to the ranking, we then have a 2 for inflation, a 2 for passive income, a 2 for security, and a 0 for capital, and a 0 for taxes. And it ranks in a 6 out of 10, which is quite higher than the other previous 2 types of incomes that we had.
Well, no, amazing. And the nice thing about property, the capital investment isn't that high because you can go and borrow against the income. So we can go to the bank and get a mortgage, and that helps. And for a lot of young people, that's their first capital investment that they make. Buy a house or buy a rental property, and they go borrow money from the bank to do that. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great one. So yeah, Paul, we're gonna leave it there for today. We'll come back to the other streams. next week.
All right. No, thanks, Yaku. Always good to talk to you.
Cheers, man.
Cheers.